hello, hello, hello.
Khandana Bhava Jagavandana Vandito Ranjana Nararupa ज्योतिरज्योति उज्ज्वलहृदिकन्द तुमि तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमि तम भंजनहार दे रंग रंग भंगवा जय अंग संग मृदंग रंग रंग भंगवा जय अंग संग गायचे छंद भगत वृंद आरती तोमार गायचे छंद भगत वृंद आरती तोमार जय जय आरती तोमार हर हर आरती तोमार शिव शिव आरती तोमार खंदन भव बंधन जगवंदन वंदितो माय जय श्री गुरु महाराज जी की जय। ॐ ह्रीं ऋतं त्वमचलो गुणजिद्गुणेभ्यः नक्तं दिवं सकरुणं तव पादपद्मं मोहं कषं बहुकृतं न भजे यतोऽहं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारी गच्छन्त्यलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्रोद्धृतोऽपि हृदमे न च भान्ति किञ्चित् तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ते तरसा त्वयि तृप्त तृष्णा रागे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि राम कृष्णे मर्त्यामृतं तव पदं मरणोन्नाशं तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारी स्नान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नाम नाथ यस्मादहं त्वशरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात् त्वमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो। ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ नमः श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। सर्वमङ्गल माङ्गल्ये शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरण्ये त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। सृष्टिस्थिति विनाशानां शक्ति भूते सनातनी गुणाश्रये गुणमये नारायणी नमोस्तुते। शरणागत दीनार्त परित्राण परायणे सर्वशान्ति हरे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते। जय 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 महामाई की जय। जय भगवान श्री रामकृष्ण देव की जय। जय स्वामी जी महाराज जी की जय।
Hello, check. Hello, check. Hello, check. Yeah. Namaste Yatirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukhasvarupaya Swami Paharine. So we had concluded the last time's discussion by talking about this pursuit of knowledge that we have as a human attribute, hemmed in by this ignorance that we have surrounding us, and the framework of knowledge that's always assumed, namely this time, space, and causation, which somehow seems to be the underlying framework that we always assume whenever we want to cast something in some kind of epistemological framework. And this contradiction between the pursuit of knowledge and the ignorance of the framework in which that knowledge is embedded was another illustration of this principle of Maya that is there in Vedanta, which encapsulates these contradictions that are inherent in every aspect of our life. I had drawn your attention to the fact last time that there are two schools of philosophy or ancient philosophy of yore, which had this strong analytical bent to them. And I had mentioned these two particularly as being extremely mirror images, so to speak, as Swami Sarvapriyananda keeps saying. On the one hand, Advaita Vedanta, on the other hand, Madhyamaka Buddhism. Yeah? And we have been discussing this doctrine or theory of Maya as it is put forward in Vedanta. And it's perhaps helpful to look at the mirror image of this concept inside the framework of Madhyamaka Buddhism, formulated by one of those giant philosophers, Nagarjuna. And it really goes back to the Buddha, this idea of pratitya samutpada, theory of dependent origination, yeah? Which means basically that these various ideas, various concepts that we have, our entire phenomenal existence, each unit is dependent on each other unit. Yeah? So, because of the way our minds are structured, we try to differentiate between various things, but when we probe these various objects that we see around us, the differences start to become more and more blurred. Yeah. So let's take a very simple thing. I mean, so there is this laptop right in front of me, and for our day-to-day usage, taking this as a unit of, as a unit, as an object, separate from the rest of the things, is quite all right. But suppose you start probing and ask the question, where in space does this laptop end and the not laptop begin? Where does this laptop end and the room around it begin? And as you start probing this difference in smaller and smaller scales, it is a scientific fact that the difference is blurred. So if you take out, so what I'm alluding to is perhaps it's a bit of an overkill, quantum theory of physics, but let's do something more commonsensical. So at each moment, the laptop sheds some molecules on its surface and incorporates some other molecules from the atmosphere onto its surface. Those molecules were not there a minute back, they are there right now. Yes, so at the molecular level, the laptop has changed. But when we speak of a laptop, are we really talking in terms of this kind of molecular composition? Certainly not. So what exactly is it that defines these physical objects? And the theory of Vedanta, on the one hand, it really goes back and it's something that we can test for ourselves today. Say, for example, our physical bodies with which we want to associate our I consciousness. This body is just a stream of matter which keeps on changing. The body we had when we were children, the body we had when we were youths, the body we have today, the body we will have 10 years down the line, assuming we still have it, they're not the same. basically the entire cellular composition of the body, with the possible exception of nerve cells, keeps getting changed every 7 years. So, where exactly is it that we are associating this I? Or is it that our resolution of the mind, just as you have resolution of pixels on a computer screen, that being too coarse is not able to perceive these changes, and therefore the stream of change is something that in a very ad hoc way is referred to as the I. This is one thing. This is from the Advaita Vedanta or the Vedanta point of view. From the Madhyamaka point of view, it's basically what it says is that the existence of this physical reality, which we call our body, is dependent on a vast number of things. The food we eat, that in turn is grown in fields. So that in turn depends on minerals in the soil, on the rain that falls, on the temperature, on the sun that basically takes up the water on the surface of the earth, forms clouds, and so on. This particular thing, this dependence of an individual existence on this much larger existence in the form of nature, is a doctrine that they encapsulate, and they call the theory of dependent origination. Yeah? It's interdependence of various things. So if we try to ask in a strictly causal framework, can we penetrate to an ultimate cause? And two kinds of answers are given. This existing framework of contradictions is what Vedanta calls Maya, and viewed slightly differently as a bunch of interdependent things gives rise to the doctrine of dependent origination in Buddhism, Madhyamaka Buddhism. And then when we try to probe causal structures in some strict way, then these contradictions throw themselves up one after another. And it is this particular aspect of reality that has been encapsulated in the Vedanta philosophy, particularly Advaita Vedanta, as this doctrine of Maya. And we had given several examples before, and the last example that we had discussed was this human pursuit of knowledge and its antithesis, the incapability of the human mind to penetrate the framework which defines this kind of empirical knowledge, namely space-time causation. We now come to another pair of contradictory features, aspects of our being. On the one hand, the sense of freedom that we have, coupled with a sense of bondage. With every breath, and this is Vivekananda, with every breath, with every pulsation of the heart, with every one of our movements, we think we are free. And the very same moment, we are shown that we are not. Bound slaves, nature's bond slaves in body, in mind, in all our thoughts, in all our feelings. And this is Maya. The point being that these two antithetical feelings, the sense of freedom and the sense of bondage, coexist in all of us. If we did not have a sense of freedom intrinsic to ourselves, then many of our social structures would make no sense. In particular, say, the notion of justice. When somebody is hauled up and asked, put in front of a jury or a judge, and some kind of judgment is passed, there is always an assumption that the person in question had the freedom to do otherwise and has made the choice, exercised his or her freedom to affect or harm the freedom of others. And it is this premise which leads us to the social structure of justice. Without assuming that a person has a certain basic sense of freedom to choose between options, the very structure of justice makes no sense. On the other hand, that same structure of justice has a certain loophole. If a person can prove that during a time when he or she commits what we call a crime, he or she was not in control of his will, if there was temporary insanity, so to speak, then that responsibility is taken away. In other words, the person was under the control of certain biological forces. Certain chemicals in our makeup allow us a certain equilibrium to function and choose. But if that chemical equilibrium is disturbed in our psychophysical organism, then even the judge says that no, there is no moral responsibility, moral freedom we can assign that individual. So at the same time, these two antithetical aspects feed into even such a macroscopic thing as the social structure of justice as it obtains in human society today. And this particular notion, this particular pair of antithetical experiences, a sense of freedom and a sense of bondage, coexist in all of us. Perhaps the best way to understand this is to assume that the human mind, in its most natural form, in its intrinsic form, fluctuates between poles and so models the entire world around us, including our societies, in terms of these pairs of opposites, and then fluctuates in between them. And so we have a notion of freedom and we have a notion of bondage. And mind itself lies somewhere in the middle as a mixture, as a conflation, as a confusion of these two facets. And the seeking of clarity is to try, through rational inquiry, to cut through this confusion, to remove this confusion and have calm clarity in its place. The next pair of antithetical objects that Vivekananda brings up are love versus attachment. The appearance in externally seems somehow at some very coarse level very similar, but they are very different. Let's finish this paragraph and we'll come back to trying to analyze what exactly is it that makes up the difference between them. And these two examples that we are giving today, two sets of examples that we are giving today, the first, bondage versus freedom, the second, attachment versus love. I think at a certain level, Vedanta gives you a fairly simple and clear formula for what it is in terms of which we can find out which aspect of these pairs of antipodal, which of these antipodal existences, some particular experience we are going through at the moment symbolizes. Okay, so now let's come to this paragraph. There was never a mother who did not think her child was a born genius, the most extraordinary child that was ever born. She dotes upon her child. Her whole soul is in the child. The child grows up, perhaps becomes a drunkard, a brute, ill-treats the mother, and the more he ill-treats her, the more her love increases. The world lauds it, praises it, as the unselfish love of the mother, little dreaming that the mother is a born slave. She cannot help it. She would 1,000 times rather throw off the burden, but she cannot. She covers it with a mass of flowers which she calls wonderful love. And this is Maya. So this, in some sense, is a rather strong statement. We are apt to regard the mother's love as something most unselfish because she nurtures the child without a thought for herself. But here Vivekananda is pointing out, and basically he's raising a question. Is what we call love done out of freedom, or is it done out of bondage? This is how this particular paragraph relates to the previous one. If one cannot help it, then it takes the side of bondage. But if it is given freely, without expecting anything in return, and one has the freedom to throw it away at a moment's notice. This is the sense in which this what we call love out of freedom should be understood, then it is on the positive side. So, out of freedom, love. Out of bondage, attachment. This is how one should try to understand these dual pairs. If one cannot do without another thing or a person and does not have the freedom to disregard it, then it is only bondage. It is not love. That is what is being exemplified by these discussions here. So, wherein do we seek the root in our consciousness? Wherein do we seek the roots of these contradictions? And in any experience, how do we decide which of these antipodal pairs is exercising itself through us? And what is proposed here, and this is, I think, the way it can be summarized. Again, it is in terms of something, the individual aspect of what has been called Maya here, and what Shankara refers to as Adhyasa, which is conflating the features of these two fundamentally opposite aspects, namely conscious and the unconscious. The nail on our body, the nails on our body, these, I think any of us, any right-thinking individual, any normal individual, would render that as something that is unconscious. Why? Because we can cut it and throw it away. On the other hand, that same nail, if you tried to pull it off, rip it off, it would take some part of your body with it and would cause much pain. And the consciousness would react to that pain. So as we move even from the tip of the nail inwards to the body of the nail, there is some movement towards consciousness from unconsciousness. The tip of the nail, if it's cut off and thrown away, causes us no concern. But the part that is attached to the rest of the body through our nerves and blood vessels causes us pain. It causes us pain. The I, which is the coordinating agency of all these personal experiences, identifies with that pain or with that indifference to pain, depending on whether you're trying to cut into the nail that is attached to the body or the nail that is not really attached to the body. And so what has happened here is, during a particular experience, we need to ask ourselves, nobody outside can do this for us. We need to ask ourselves the question, is this experience affecting the more conscious aspect of ourselves or the more unconscious aspect of ourselves? Such questions form the basis of this activity called Viveka, analysis, discrimination. Yeah? Shankara has this beautiful little book called Vivek Chudamani. Viveka, a crest jewel of discrimination, analysis, separating out the chaff from the core of the the seed. Yeah? This analysis, this capacity for analysis, once it becomes ingrained in us, it means Viveka or discrimination has started making its presence felt in our consciousness. So whenever we look at these two, so this last example, love versus attachment, the first is something that is more towards the conscious aspect of things. Attachment is that which is more towards the unconscious aspect of things. It is consciousness that gives rise to this sense of freedom. Unconsciousness to this feeling of bondage. Whatever we regard as positive in our experience is most of the time associated with that, for most people, associated with the conscious aspect of our beings. And that which we typically attribute as negative is associated with the unconscious aspect of our beings. However, lives do not proceed in this kind of stark black and white, but rather as a palette of grays, as a mixture. When one throws some features of consciousness towards the side of the unconscious throws some of its features onto the aspect of consciousness. And this superposition of the qualities of one on the other at the individual level is what Shankara calls adhyasa. And what, in its larger, more cosmic, more universal aspect, it is that which is called Maya by Vivekananda here. Now, as we did the last time, it's perhaps wise to ask ourselves, is there something in our biology, in the way the psychophysical human being organism, which we call the human being, is designed, in which these two aspects can both be seen? And as we had said last time, the higher human brain, which is really the product of evolution for so many millions of years, which distinguishes the human being from other creatures, this is the seat, the locus of most activities that we call higher. The existence at a more mechanical level, stimulus response level, is what we associate to the unconscious reactions. Again, this is a convenient dichotomy because we as human beings cannot think but through these dichotomies. And it is here that this difference must be sought if we are to seek the explanation for this in the biological system that defines human beings. It's the polarity is between the higher brain activities and unconscious or instinctive nervous activities. It's not that the response of the nerve to a stimulus, even at a peripheral level, is something that's totally unconscious. It's just that the higher brain does not have command over it. So, for instance, there is this little test which is used for testing how healthy your nerves are, something called the nerve conduction study. Doctors use it all the time. It basically tests how fast electricity travels in your nerves. These nerves in our system, they are basically the analog in the human body of electrical wires. And it is these that carry electricity to the muscles. So if they are stimulated, it makes the muscle twitch. However conscious one is, it's very difficult to control a muscle and prevent it from twitching when there is this electrical stimulus. A dead body which has been dead for a sufficiently long time will not have a similar kind of response. So even at that very unconscious level, there is a trace of this consciousness, so to speak. So as I said, it's not easy to completely segregate these. But if somehow we have to seek an explanation for these antithetical features in the biological aspects of us as organisms, then perhaps that should be sought between higher brain activities and the instinctive activities of our nerves. What is very heartening is this feature that has been discovered in science only lately, but has been used implicitly before this. It's what is called this neuroplasticity. It means that we as individuals can train our system to react or withhold from reacting to certain external situations. So, between these antipodes of consciousness versus unconsciousness, we can exercise at every moment of our being whether we choose to be more conscious or whether we choose to be more unconscious. This choice is there in our hands at every moment. Which brings back to this refrain that I have said many times. The secret of Karma Yoga, as Vivekananda calls it, is to do whatever we are doing with the fullest possible attention. It does not require any kind of theology, any kind of religious background to carry it out. It's exactly this that is called mindfulness amongst the Buddhists. And in a strictly theistic religion, Christianity, it's exactly this exercise which is called practice of the presence of God. Between these three, in terms of actual practice, there is no difference. Doing whatever one is doing with fullest possible attention versus mindfulness versus practice of the presence of God. Really, in terms of what it means, in terms of some actual practice, there is no real difference. These are three names given to the same kind of activity, inspired by different belief systems or absence of belief systems. But the actual external manifestation is the same. And therein lies the solution. The exercising of this freedom, this limited freedom that we feel within us at every moment, to be more conscious, to be more alive, is what is at the heart of the practice and is the output of this discrimination or analysis. We'll take this up again next time. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.